ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm Al Sarkar, editor at Large Economy Middle East, and today we're talking about the rise of agentic AI in the GCC, driving the next wave of AI revolution. With that in mind, can I invite my guests, Tanuja, Randery, and Hatem Dowidar to the stage, please? Welcome both.
Thank you.
Now, I'll read a little bit to begin with because there's a lot of data here and I want to make sure I get that right. Over the past few years, the GCC has moved faster than most regions, translating AI ambition into action. According to IDC research commissioned by AWS and ETAN, 74% of GCC organizations plan to adopt agentic AI, and yet 19% have moved beyond pilots to full-scale deployments. Now, this stat is not about ambition, but it's about readiness and trust and execution. 45% of organizations cite insufficient data maturity, 32% worry about workforce disruption, regulatory ambiguity continues to restrain innovation for 41% of UAE organizations and 30% Saudi Arabia. Today's discussion will bring together policy, enterprise leadership, and global cloud expertise to address one core question. What will it take for the GCC not just to adopt agentic AI, but lead the next global AI wave to scale securely, responsibly, and competitively? And with that in mind, Dowidar, I'd like to start with you. And what I'll do is I have 4 questions each, one back and forth, and then at the end of your answer, if you'd like to add on your colleague's question, please go ahead.
Thank you. And by the way, we know each other super well, so
it's going to be a wonderful. Now, from AWS's global experience, what separates organizations that scale agentic AI from those that remain stuck in pilots?
Yeah, it's a great question, by the way. And I think it's true whether it's GCC or anywhere else in the world. But I think I'll probably leave you with 3 or 4 really big areas that we see are the difference between success and non-success. And I don't think the AI transformation necessarily is a different transformation than one we've been through, but the warp speed nature of it makes it very, very interesting. So I think, so the 5 things I would call out, or the 4 things at least minimum that I would call out is 1, it needs to be driven from the top. When you see the top-down organization commitment, and I've seen it with Hatem and the work we do at EM, you actually get that drive through the organization. So that's number 1. And that means tying it to the organizational strategy rather than let's go off and do 50 things. The second, I think, and we at Amazon think quite carefully about this, is the leaders you've got in your organization. You need people who are willing to be disruptive, curious, transparent, right? And actually are hungry to invent and reinvent your processes. What you do not want with AI is a little bit of tinkering on automation. Like that's not going to give you the bang for your buck. And along with that means these are leaders who are going to hire and build great teams who are also hungry to build. So at Amazon, we say we're builders and learners, and I think that's what's helped us scale to $132 billion over the last 15 years. And then I think the third thing I would say is we talk a lot about failing fast, experimentation, empower the organization, high velocity decision making. To make all of that come to life, you need to empower your teams with mechanisms that are embedded in the org. So it's not enough to say, of course you should fail fast. Like, of course, we all say that. But how do you empower the organization? We have one tiny little tool that we use. And it's called, and Hatem and I have talked about this, it's called one-way doors and two-way doors. The organization should experiment with two-way door decisions because you can come back through the door. But if it's a one-way door decision, it needs more people involved. And I think things like that can be really encouraging your org to move forward. And then the last point I will make is you need partners and tools and infrastructures, and we'll come back to it, that provide you the security and the resiliency, frankly, to be able to move at speed. So your data is always the thing that you cherish most and sits with you. But those are some of my thoughts. It's not technology. It really is the culture of the organization.
And actually, I'll pick up on this. I think that agentic AI is the new thing that we're all working with. But remember, we are living in a very, very ambitious region. So if you look about what has been happening in the last 20 years, in all technologies, be it 3G, 4G, 5G, the region was ahead of the world, was always there with, South Korea, Japan, and the cutting edge of technology. When we talk about airports and airlines, you look at Emirates, you look at the Etihad, you look at Qatar Airways, now Riyadh Air is coming. I mean, cutting edge of aviation. You look at infrastructure overall, whether it's roads, networks, now new high-speed trains that have been built in Saudi and the UAE, these are also cutting edge. So the region is really about endorsing the newest technology and doing it really, really well. And now I believe that AI and agentic AI is establishing as an existing technology. So it's the same way like the PC or the mobile phone or smartphones, came and they are a fact. It's not anymore, maybe before, generative AI, we were talking about AI more as a scientific term. But now it's become an everyday reality. So the region, like they have done with the other things, will catch on to that and will be quite leading compared to many, many other regions in the way we will implement and we will get these things done. And, and sorry, about this fail fast, I always have one very important quotation is do or do not. There's no try. Anybody knows who said that? No? Yoda. Yoda said in Star Wars. So, and this is really, we are going to make it happen. So I don't think this is something it might take some iterations, but we will make it happen in the region. We are doing it to ourselves as a company. So we're not only promoting this. I mean, we are partnering with AWS and trying to help a lot of companies do it, but we're doing it to ourselves. The way we are looking into how to disrupt our own business and get agentic AI to do a lot of functions that were done manually before, and manually I mean by a human being. We're trying now to supplement or let's say complement the capabilities of humans with this agentic AI.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on, but where do you think organizations truly get stuck? Is it data? Is it operating models, leadership incentives? And which barrier do you think is the most underestimated from all of these or any others?
Look, I think like any change, there is human resistance to change. So, the change from steam to electricity, the change from manual calculation to calculators to computers, all these things over time, as a kid, we were not allowed to use a calculator in school. I think that's a bit telling on my age. By the time I was in university, we were able to use calculators, and that was okay. But you cannot use a computer. Now my kids, they take the computer, everything is with their computers. They have their computers in classes, in exams. That's how they do it. So things have changed. There's always some resistance. And I think the biggest barrier we have is the resistance to change. And that resistance could be at the top, where the leader of the organization feels that this is not the way we used to do things. I'm used to doing it this way, and I want it to be done still the same way. And it could be people that are feeling that their jobs might be substituted. And rather than try to see how they can improve themselves and do things in a different way, they try to slow down progress. And what we have learned through, tens of thousands of years since the invention of fire and the wheel, that you cannot stop progress. Progress will happen. So it's either you endorse it and find the best way to get onto the bandwagon, or you're left behind.
Yeah. And if I could, I think there's three things I feel like actually for the GCC in particular will make the difference. You already have a great vision, like there's no question. There's a ton of investment, but we ourselves are hugely invested in the UAE. We invested $5 billion to build our region in the UAE, as you know, and the economic value impact of that is at least 2x. We expect. Well, why have we done this? Because you've got this amazing vision. But to make it real, I think the biggest barrier, I would say, in addition to change resistance, and it comes down to, in fact, talent. I think the skill set across the board is not available and not at the level of digital skills that we need to be able to accelerate adoption of this technology. And I don't just mean agentic AI as well, because you need your data foundations. you need to be running on a platform that allows you scalability and resiliency. So I think for us to, where we need to invest as organizations is skilling up massively. That's one. The other thing is regulation. And I think this is where you've, in the GCC, done a great job. I think the regulatory environment is a lot more known, a lot more open than we see, by the way, in some places around Europe. And in Europe, people will tell you that they feel like the regulatory environment is like a jigsaw puzzle you're working on and the pieces keep moving around, right? 40 euros out of every 100 euros is spent on compliance. I think this is where you've got an incredible opportunity, and I would not waste it. And then I think the third one is the startup ecosystem. And I think we are just starting in the GCC, if you're asking on the startup ecosystem. These are the founders that will actually fuel the growth. So I think those three is where I would say to you, if we invested time and energy, the rest will come. And I do think the GCC needs to do all three at warp speed in order for us to get that.
Wonderful. That kind of brings me right into my next question for you, which is, how does the GCC's approach to innovation and data sovereignty compare with Europe, Asia, and North America?
You want to go first? He's the absolute expert on this topic.
Look, I think the whole world is now thinking of the types of data we have. There are data that is easily transposed across borders. For example, no one has ever talked about data sovereignty for Stars, which is our streaming platform, or Netflix, or or Randery, or Spotify, because at the end of the day, the criticality of what's your taste in music is not an issue. But when you start talking about people's location, people financial transactions, who they are calling, or what's the content of these calls, that's when these things become very sovereign. Because at the end of the day, when we talk people, we're talking individuals that are, normal individuals, but there is data of people that are in police, in military, and lots of other things where you want to keep these data in the countries. And data sovereignty has been an issue that's been discussed over the years. And I think any country that has the pillars of AI and data pools, and all the GCC countries have that pillar. The pillar is having land, energy, the capability to get the technology, so having to partner with AWS or others, and of course the capital to invest. Then there's no question. Of course, you establish sovereign capabilities. I think the sovereign question becomes a lot more complex when we talk, for example, and I've talked about this last year in Davos, when you talk about Africa, and we have a lot of operations in Africa. You come to some countries that don't have any data center capability, and then they say, but we want data sovereignty. But in that case, it means they're left behind because they don't have the pillars of that AI ecosystem. And at the same time, they want data sovereignty. So the only thing is then you cannot do anything. So I think the question in GCC is very clear. I think the pillars are there, and the knowledge and understanding of what data sovereignty means is there. So it's operational. And we actually have launched a sovereign launchpad with Amazon, with AWS, and it's very successful. And we're getting customers do that. Also, other hyperscalers have sovereign clouds in the UAE, in Saudi, and it's operational and it's working. Qatar as well has sovereign cloud. So we see that Bahrain has sovereign cloud. So we see that now the emergence of this in the GCC because the capability is there. I think the question, and when we come to Davos, is what happens elsewhere where there's no capability? How can we help cross the digital divide rather than having AI and agentic AI, which is a topic today, widening that divide? Because some countries will not have access to that sovereignty, and then the regulation will prevent them from joining this new technology.
And there is a big difference. I think Hatem's right to call this out. I think the definition of sovereignty is, to be honest, extremely varied, right? I think everyone in this room probably has their own version of that definition. I do want to mention public cloud is sovereign by design. Your data, when it's in the UAE, sits in the UAE. Only you, as the owner of that data, own the keys to that data, right? we don't own your keys. If you lose your keys, that's the end of that data, by the way. So, the fact is there's a big misconfusion around the fact that to be sovereign, it needs to be 100% owned, operated, to be sovereign. No, you can be in the public cloud, your data is with you, right? It doesn't leave the region, and you are sovereign. Now, for certain workloads, and I agree with her, there is an extraordinarily regulated, very heavily defense-oriented or military-oriented or healthcare-oriented data that then you want this additional layer of protection, right? And we are able to do that as well. In fact, I don't know if you're aware, but in Europe, we recently, last week, launched our European sovereign cloud. And by the only difference between the rest of the clouds and this is this cloud is disconnected from any other cloud in the region. So we operate about 9 clouds around Europe. This one sits on its own in Germany, right? And it's entirely operated by EU citizens with an independent board. But it has all the features of a public cloud, because what you don't want is some sovereign version which doesn't allow you to do any innovation, right? So I think that's the distinction. We have to be careful. We don't get caught up in regulation that stifles innovation.
And to pick on this, I think very important, and that was the big thing that cloud brought to us, is the standardization. So you're able to have many instances of the same application that even if they run in sovereign clouds, it's the same application on the same platform. You don't need to invent it again. And when you want to upgrade, you just upgrade it everywhere at once. And this is very important for companies. And if I am developing some AI agents that are helping in customer care or retail or in finance, I don't want to develop this in the UAE different than what I developed in Saudi, different than what I developed in Egypt, different than Morocco, and so on, different than Eastern Europe. I want it to be standardized so that I don't pay the cost of development 38 times. So having the capability of that platform to be very similar, that I do the development ones, deploy in many places. Some of them will have a regulation that it has to be a sovereign cloud. Some of the implementations might be in a public cloud, because some of my countries will say, I'm okay with public cloud. And that's good, because it's the same development that I do, and I can then implement many instances of the same agent everywhere.
And I'm really enjoying this dynamic of question and debate. So I'm going to have a bit of a follow-up for both of you as well. How can sovereignty, compliance, and cybersecurity become accelerators rather than constraints when it comes to AI adoption?
Good question. Look, you want my opinion? Extra compliance is never accelerated.
Yes.
And this is what Tanuja left me to answer. So I saw the smile on her face. So look, extra regulation, extra compliance is never an accelerator. But it's a fail-safe protection mechanism. So it will not help us go faster, but it will help us operate in a safer environment. And for that, I still take it and happy to always promote it and see how we can work within these constraints. But it will never be, you do it sovereign and you do it, on the ground. It means it's going to be faster. It will never be.
Yeah, I agree. I do think, I think it is really important for us to say this. Compliance is necessary, and it's very important that we are operating responsibly. My personal belief on this one is, rather than regulatory constraints, what we need, in addition to obviously the core regulations around this, which is really around your data, is to embed the ability for you to be safe within the technology. And let me give you an example of that, right? So within our technology, as an example, we have something that we call Amazon guardrails, okay? So on our platform, and just to be a little bit geeky for a second, on our platform, which allows you to leverage any model you want. If you go onto Amazon Bedrock as an example, it's a platform that allows you to leverage Amazon Nova, which is our foundation model, Claude, which you all know very well, Mistral, DeepSeek, OpenAI, etc., etc. But here's the interesting thing. Your data sits behind Bedrock in a virtual private cloud environment, which means when you're training and inferencing, you're not giving the model your data, right? And on top of it, the guardrails allow you to remove bias, harmful content, and it vets the responses you're getting. So this automated reasoning concept is super important because you don't know what the model is playing back to you. And we're making sure that it's automating the reasoning so you are confident about what's coming back. So I'm always one for embedded in the technology. That way you don't have to worry about it. The other thing is when you're using agents are going to be able to work for you autonomously. That's the power of an agent, right? Agents can work overnight while we're sleeping, which is wonderful. But agents need to have your organizational guidelines, all the compliance that you follow, and you need to give that into the agent and then deploy the agent against the outcome. You don't want a human in the loop pressing the button all the time. Like that's just going to slow down all of this incredible work. But you don't want the agent to go rogue either. So these are the kinds of things that I think are really important that we're embedding together, by the way, as part of the sovereign cloud launchpad that we've launched in the UAE. It's not just a cloud infrastructure. It's all of these things that make you much, much more safer in the way that you operate without slowing you down.
Tanuja, if I can direct this one to you, because it's about what architectural shifts are essential to support multi-agent enterprise-grade AI systems.
Yeah, look, I think I'll try and simplify that. What I would say that is really, really important is for you to get the maximum impact from your AI deployment. I think we've seen over the past 2 years that there's been a ton of experimentation, and that's great because everyone's using it, they're trying to get used. The problem that I hear from all the CEOs I speak to now is they're really getting a little exhausted with all of that experimentation, which isn't necessarily yielding the ROI that they want. And so I think the fundamental thing that's really important is that you have your eye. And I'm going to ask you, which are your top three? What are the three big needle-moving processes that give you economic leverage? And so if you're a bank, I don't know if anyone in the audience is in the banking sector, but if you're in the bank, know your customer is super, super important. If you're an insurance company, underwriting is super, super important, right? If you're a media company, as you can imagine, content creation could become a really, really important thing, and regulatory environment related with that content. So my one piece of advice is pick the three things that matter, deploy all of your resources and capabilities against that, and then make sure that you've got platforms, as you were saying earlier, that give you those tools that your builders can use, whether it's Bedrock or something else, or Agent Core or something else, that you can deploy agents on your own, rather than someone coming in, loads of consulting organizations and integrators, and they all perform a phenomenal job for you, but you don't want agentic to now become the old BPO. So the architecture should be simple, focused, and secure and enterprise grade.